You know that feeling, right? That little hum in the back of your mind. Maybe a nagging question that just whispers, what if there's more to it than we're being told? Or maybe, what if some things, some really unsettling things, never actually stopped?
Yeah.
Today, we're doing more than just, scratching the surface. We're diving deep into that unsettling space. We're exploring why the assumption that they, whoever they might be, simply stopped certain activities, why that might be a really dangerous assumption, especially when you consider how much vital information just seems to vanish into thin air.
Right.
We're here to ask, what if the shadows of the past stretch further into our present than we maybe dare to imagine?
Indeed. And our journey today, it really takes us through these intricate layers of government secrecy,
Yeah.
and the deliberate shaping of public perception, often through powerful, sometimes quite insidious narratives. And we'll look at the very real-world mechanisms of control, things that impact everything from individual rights, basic rights, all the way up to the foundational structure of society itself.
What?
And we're not just theorizing here. We'll be looking at how control over information and, frankly, resonate deeply in our world right now.
Okay. So we've pulled together an incredible stack of sources for you, the listener. Everything from, chilling declassified documents detailing Cold War mind control experiments.
Yeah, the MK Ultra stuff.
Exactly. To recent investigative reports on modern immigration policies, and even some really with, it's uncomfortable, sure, but it's essential. How can we ever confidently assume past governmental activities, especially the morally dubious ones, have truly stopped?
Right. It's a huge assumption.
Especially when we think about how much of the historical record has been deliberately obscured or, just wiped away. Our sources paint a compelling picture, maybe deeply unsettling, but compelling nonetheless, that history isn't just a straightforward record of what happened.
No, not at all.
Often, it's a carefully curated account of what was allowed to remain, and crucially, what was intentionally erased.
Exactly. The gaps are often as telling as the records themselves. And to really get a handle on this architecture of control, we have to start in the past, specifically with the infamous CIA program known as MK Ultra.
Right. The big one.
The big one. And its origins, it wasn't like some sudden malevolent act appearing out of nowhere. It was actually a pretty complex response to what they perceived as very real, existential, external threats. You have to remember the climate.
The Cold War.
The Cold War. Globally tense. The driving forces behind it were significant, almost panic-driven, you could say.
Like what?
Well, for instance, Cold War anxieties were hugely fueled by the work of the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. His research into behavioral conditioning.
Pavlov's dogs, yeah.
Right.
Ring the bell, they salivate.
Exactly. So the CIA, they're observing Pavlov's success in conditioning dogs, and they start asking themselves, pretty seriously, okay, if Pavlov can get a dog to salivate at a bell, what kind of more sophisticated, maybe sinister methods could the Soviets be developing for humans?
Ah, okay, so it's that fear of the other side having an edge.
Precisely. And that line of thinking, we now know, created a really dangerous, slippery slope for their own research into human behavior. And adding to this fear were the Moscow show trials. Really chilling stuff. Stalin orchestrating purges of political enemies.
Right, where people confess to things they couldn't possibly have done.
Exactly. They'd stand trial, confess to these outrageously false charges, sometimes even begging to be found guilty. And this just baffled Western intelligence. The CIA speculated maybe it's mind control, maybe powerful drugs or advanced hypnotism forcing these confessions.
So they're seeing things they can't explain and jumping to, well, mind control?
Pretty much. But arguably the most immediate, the most impactful catalyst was the downing of American POWs during the Korean War.
Okay.
These captured pilots held by the enemy later made anti-American statements. Some even admitted to dropping germ bombs, which was a huge propaganda point for the other side. And the CIA, back then largely unaware of the extent of manipulation the Koreans themselves might have been using, they again asked, are they being drugged? Are they being hypnotized? Is this brain warfare?
That term again, brain warfare.
Yeah. And this period, this fear, this uncertainty, it truly ignited what became a full-blown mind control arms race. The U.S. felt absolutely compelled to catch up or maybe even surpass whatever they imagined the Soviets were.
This clandestine arms race was a specific figure, right? Sidney Gottlieb.
That's the name.
It's kind of a remarkable story. How does this guy, a bioorganic chemist, end up being the mastermind behind such a shadowy, ethically bankrupt program? His background seems almost contradictory.
Gottlieb was definitely a complex figure. Brilliant scientist, no doubt. PhD in bioorganic chemistry from Caltech.
Impressive.
Very. Yet, in many ways, he was always sort of an outsider. His parents were Jewish immigrants from Hungary. He apparently carried this profound sense of debt, of loyalty to his adopted country, the U.S. He actually volunteered for the army in World War II, but got rejected because of a limp he was born with, and he also had a stutter. Physical traits he felt kind of reinforced his own perception of himself as different.
Ah, interesting psychological angle.
Yeah, and ironically, this brilliant scientist, this outsider, was exactly what the CIA was looking for in the post-WWII era. Science and tech were increasingly seen as crucial for national security.
Right place, right time, sort of.
And in a really curious twist of fate, Allen Dulles, who would become the formidable head of the CIA.
A major figure.
Huge figure. Dulles also had a club foot. And reputedly, he took a liking to Gottlieb. Maybe saw a bit of a shared sense of otherness.
Huh. Small world connections.
Maybe. So Dulles, just 3 days after giving this pivotal speech called Brain Warfare, where he stressed the psychological battlefield of the Cold War, he signs the papers initiating MKUltra in 1953. And he puts Gottlieb directly at its head.
Wow. Just like that.
Pretty much. A rapid, almost instant ascent to immense, largely unchecked power.
So MKUltra wasn't the CIA's very first try at this kind of thing, was it? I seem to recall hearing about predecessors. Did they sort of build up to it?
That's absolutely correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Before MKUltra was formally established, the CIA had already dabbled in similar stuff, though maybe smaller scale.
Like what?
Well, there was Bluebird, a program focused mainly on finding a truth drug.
A truth drug.
Yeah, and the name was quite literal. They wanted prisoners to sing like a bird, spill secrets.
Subtle.
Not really, no. They reported some early, though limited, success. Said they noted lowered inhibitions in captured spies when given certain substances. Now, these initial findings, however vague they were, they only spurred more interest and, crucially, more funding.
Okay.
So Bluebird then evolved into Artichoke.
Artichoke. Interesting names.
They had a knack for code names. Artichoke expanded the scope to include hypnotism. A key figure here was Morse Allen, one of Bluebird's original heads. He even went so far as to hire a stage magician to teach him hypnotism.
A stage magician?
Look at that.
Seriously. And Allen would then try to hypnotize his own secretaries, trying to get them to regress to childhood memories or imagine they were, like, on a surfboard.
That sounds bizarre. And probably ineffective.
Well, the fundamental problem he ran into, and this highlights the early limits, was figuring out if his subjects were genuinely influenced or if they were just humoring him because, well, he was their boss.
Yeah, I could see that.
Right. But these early limited efforts, even if they weren't always conclusive in their stated goals, they absolutely laid the critical psychological and operational groundwork for the much bigger, much more ethically questionable MKUltra. They kind of normalized the whole idea of experimenting with the human mind within the agency.
Okay. And when we talk about the scope of MKUltra, it really wasn't just about drugs like LSD, was it? That's the popular image, but the reality sounds much broader and maybe more disturbing.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It went way, way beyond just LSD. I mean, LSD is what most people think of, and yeah, it was definitely a significant part.
Sure.
But it was just one of a staggering 149 identified sub-projects. 149.
Yep. These programs included extensive psychological experiments, many of which sound like something straight out of a horror novel.
Like?
Electric shocks, applied at varying intensities. Prolonged sensory deprivation, designed specifically to break down a subject's sense of self, their identity, at this technique called psychic driving.
Psychic driving, what's that?
It involved playing auditory messages, sometimes negative, self-incriminating stuff, on endless repeat, for hours, days, even weeks sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And occasionally, while patients were in drug-induced comas, totally defenseless.
That's horrifying.
It is. But maybe one of the wildest, most ethically terrifying sub-projects involved implanting electrodes into the brains of animals.
Wait, animal brain implant?
Yeah, to control their movements. They actually successfully steered rats, cats, dogs by stimulating pleasure centers in the brain.
Okay.
Well, the declassified documents I've seen describe the CIA planning to attach payloads of interest, specifically biological and chemical weapons, to these animal guidance systems for direct executive action type operations, assassinations, basically.
They wanted to use remote-controlled animals as weapons.
That was the plan. They even speculated that yaks and bears would be ideal. capable of carrying heavy payloads over great distances under adverse climatic conditions.
Yaks and bears carrying bioweapons. That's something else. Did they actually do it?
Well, there's no concrete evidence this specific animal-guided weapon concept ever actually went into the field, thankfully. But the fact that they were experimenting with it, the detailed planning behind it, is profoundly chilling. It just reveals an agency willing to explore any avenue, no matter how extreme, to gain an edge.
Truly disturbing on so many levels. The sheer scope, the imagination behind it all. But the real tragedy, the devastating realities of MK Ultra often fell upon unwitting human subjects, didn't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where the deepest ethical breaches lie. The consequences were horrific. Experiments were routinely done on unwitting subjects. Prisoners who had no recourse. Psychiatric patients, already vulnerable. And even, tragically, CIA personnel themselves.
The Frank Olson case comes to mind.
Exactly. One of the most famous, most heartbreaking cases. Frank Olson, a scientist in the Special Operations Division, he was unwittingly dosed with LSD at a retreat with colleagues back in '53.
Right.
He subsequently suffered a severe psychotic break, became intensely paranoid, and died just days later after jumping, or perhaps falling, the circumstances are still debated, from a hotel window in New York City.
And Gottlieb's reaction?
Chillingly, Gottlieb initially dismissed it as basically a prank that went fatally wrong, which just illustrates a profound lack of empathy or accountability, or both.
Unbelievable. And it didn't stop there, did it? There was Operation Midnight Climax.
Yeah, an even darker subproject. And importantly, it was initiated after the Olson incident, which tells you lessons about safety or ethics were clearly not learned.
Okay, what was Midnight Climax?
Here, a narcotics officer named George White, directly funded by Gottlieb, set up these safe houses in New York and San Francisco. He would dose unwitting individuals with LSD.
Unwitting again.
Unwitting. Including clients of prostitutes. The prostitutes were often paid informants, and, shockingly, even some of his own friends and family.
His family.
That's what the records suggest. And he'd observe their reactions behind one-way mirrors, apparently often from a portable toilet, all while drinking liquor bought with CIA funds.
This sounds like something out of a really dark movie.
It does. White himself was reportedly a self-confessed addict of drugs and sex and remained unapologetic about his actions. He viewed his subjects as just experimental fodder.
Were there documented cases of serious harm?
Oh, yes. One particularly devastating outcome involved a woman he dosed while her one-year-old daughter was present.
Oh, no.
She suffered a severe reactive psychosis from the experience, was committed to a mental asylum for years, and eventually died there. Her life just irrevocably destroyed by this experiment.
Just tragic. And then there was Dr. Ewan Cameron in Canada.
Ah, yes. Dr. Ewan Cameron, a very renowned psychiatrist, actually. Former president of the American Psychiatric Association. He worked at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal and received substantial MK Ultra funding.
So, a respected figure, what was he doing?
Cameron held this deeply disturbing belief that mental illness was essentially just learned bad behaviors, and his aim was to reduce patients to a blank slate through extreme, frankly, torturous methods.
Like the psychic driving you mentioned.
Exactly that, and more. Massive electric shocks way beyond standard ECT at the time. Prolonged sensory deprivation, playing negative auditory messages thousands of times on endless loops, sometimes while patients were kept in drug-induced comas for weeks on end, completely unable to resist.
This is almost unbearable to hear.
It is. And the profound, almost unbearable irony here. Cameron had previously served as an evaluator of Nazi prisoners during the Nuremberg trials.
Nuremberg, which established ethical codes for experiments.
Precisely. Codes based fundamentally on informed consent. Yet he completely violated those very codes in his own research. A staggering hypocrisy.
What happened to his patients?
His work reduced many patients to what witnesses described as vegetables, completely unable to care for themselves. There's documentation of a nursing student being reduced to a state where she would just pee her own bed, having lost all sense of self, of dignity. And these weren't marginal figures doing this work. Often, they were leading psychiatrists, giving a veneer of scientific legitimacy to these appalling acts.
It sounds like, for all the horror and the experimentation, a lot of these methods were actually profound failures in their ultimate goal, like creating programmed assassins or perfect truth serums.
Largely, yes. In terms of their stated primary goals, they mostly failed.
But there was a strange, almost chilling irony in what did prove to be successful, wasn't there?
Yes, the success was a profound irony, and it carries a really crucial insight for our discussion today, especially the why we shouldn't assume they stopped part. While MK Ultra largely failed in its direct aims creating Manchurian candidates, infallible truth serums, its most successful methods, actually involved making people believe they were taking truth drugs or believe they were being hypnotized.
So perception was key.
Exactly. By inducing the perception of manipulation, even if the actual drugs or hypnosis were placebos or faked, subjects were more likely to comply or reveal information. For example, they'd use covert cues, like a hidden heater making someone's hands feel warm during a supposed hypnosis session, leading the subject to genuinely believe they were susceptible.
Wow.
It demonstrated a critical point. The perception of power, the belief in control, could be as powerful, maybe even more powerful than actual direct manipulation. It showed reality could be shaped by suggestion, by narrative.
That's a huge insight.
It is. And the irony continued. When MK Ultra failed to yield definitive mind control results, the CIA didn't just abandon these kinds of tactics, they essentially reverted back to torture, using new euphemisms like enhanced interrogation and executive action for assassination, effectively going back to the brutal methods they were trying to move beyond, but now with this thin veil of scientific exploration or legitimacy.
But the truly damning detail, the reason why we should never assume they stopped, it really lies in the information itself, right? Or rather, the deliberate lack of it. What happened to the records of all these devastating projects?
And this is where the informational void, a central theme of our deep dive today, really begins. This crystallizes the problem of assuming cessation. In the 1970s, as Gottlieb and the CIA head at the time, Richard Helms, were nearing retirement, and crucially, as congressional inquiries started circling.
They knew the heat was coming.
They absolutely did. They deliberately and systematically destroyed many of the MK Ultra files, incinerated them.
Destroyed them, just like that.
Just like that.
Yeah.
To prevent others, particularly Congress and the public, from ever truly knowing the full extent of what they had been doing. And astonishingly, this act of destruction, this obstruction of potential justice and oversight, was never punished.
So they got away with destroying the evidence.
Completely. And the impact of this deliberate act of destruction was, and remains, profound. It created this immense informational void, a black hole where crucial history should be.
Which means?
Which means this void leaves the door wide open for anyone to paint MK Ultra as anything they want to. It contributes to unchecked speculation, to conspiracy theories, to a persistent lack of clarity, precisely because we don't know what was in those files. The absence of a complete historical record means we can never fully account for the true scope, the methodologies, or, tragically, all the victims of these past activities. We're left with fragments, and in those fragments, fertile ground for endless questions and, frankly, continued suspicion.
So it's not just that the records were destroyed, but there was this pervasive lack of oversight and accountability that allowed it to happen in the first place.
Yes.
Right. And then allowed it to be covered up for so long. It sounds like a self-perpetuating system.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to put it. This wasn't just an isolated incident of bad actors. It was enabled by a systemic lack of accountability. The CIA's operations, especially something as sensitive as MK Ultra, were highly compartmentalized.
Need-to-know basis.
Extreme need to know. Only about a dozen people knew the full extent of the program, apparently. A stark contrast to the hundreds involved in its various sub-projects. This extreme compartmentalization meant a significant lack of internal checks and balances. It created an environment where ethical considerations could be easily bypassed.
And what about external oversight? Congress.
Well, congressional oversight during the Cold War was, frankly, minimal to non-existent for the CIA. Many members of Congress explicitly stated they did not wish to know what the CIA was doing.
They didn't want to know. Why?
It was partly a mentality held over from World War II successes, like the Manhattan Project, where operating without external scrutiny was seen as beneficial, even patriotic, for national security. This environment fostered a culture where unethical activities could not only continue for decades, but could also be easily obscured and, ultimately, have their records destroyed.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. And it brings us to what's been termed the vicious cycle of secrecy within intelligence agencies. And it's a powerful mechanism for understanding why such activities might persist.
Okay, explain that cycle.
So secrecy, in this dynamic, leads directly to plausible deniability. The ability to credibly deny knowledge or responsibility if things go wrong.
Right. I knew nothing.
Exactly. Plausible deniability, in turn, encourages reckless and ethically questionable behavior because there's less fear of being held accountable. Now, when such reckless behavior eventually leads to embarrassment through leaks like the New York Times revelations in the 70s that brought MKUltra into the public eye, the knee-jerk response from within the agency is often to demand even more secrecy, citing national security, claiming the leaks prove they need tighter control.
So the problem reinforces the conditions that caused it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It perpetuates the cycle rather than stopping the underlying activities or implementing genuine reform. This historical pattern destroying records, minimal oversight, a self-reinforcing cycle of secrecy makes it incredibly difficult, maybe even naive, to confidently assert that such activities truly ceased, or that the mechanisms that allowed them have been fully dismantled. The very act of destruction ensured plausible deniability, and plausible deniability is the lifeblood of unchecked power. Hashtag 1.2, modern-day secrecy and resistance to oversight.
That's a really powerful and, frankly, deeply concerning historical overview. So the essential question becomes, what does this all mean for us today? Does this historical pattern, the secrecy, the information destruction, the obscured accountability, does it still echo in our contemporary world? Or have we truly moved past such things? Our sources suggest that the architecture of control, while maybe evolving in its methods and who's pulling the levers, remains persistent, often operating just beneath the surface of public awareness.
Yeah, the echoes are not just faint. They are quite clear, sometimes quite loud, if you know where to listen, or maybe where you can't listen.
How so?
Well, consider the new immigration detention center down in the Florida Everglades. It's been cynically named Alligator Alcatraz.
The alligator Alcatraz.
Yes.
Serious.
Seriously. The name itself is a piece of narrative control, which we'll get into more later. But the facility has been widely criticized as inhumane and cruel, and its name directly matches the aggressive rhetoric from the administration about immigration.
Okay, but the secrecy part.
Right. Despite federal law explicitly allowing oversight and inspection of such facilities, state lawmakers and even members of the U.S. Congress have been repeatedly denied entry to inspect it.
Denied entry. On what grounds?
Often vague pretexts like safety reasons, which immediately makes you ask, if it's unsafe for trained officials, for lawmakers to go inside, why are migrants, potentially including vulnerable people, maybe even minors, being held inside?
Good question.
This isn't just about one facility. It's about controlling access, controlling information, preventing oversight. And Florida is notable here. They seem to be acting unilaterally under their 297G authority.
Yeah.
That's the program allowing state local police to perform federal immigration functions, but usually under federal oversight.
But you're saying the oversight isn't happening.
It appears they're operating seemingly without that federal oversight, and they refuse to provide critical information about the detainees or even justify the massive $450 million tax bill for the facility. A bill which, notably, FEMA refuses to reimburse.
FEMA? Why FEMA?
Well, FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They handle disaster relief funds. Their refusal to reimburse suggests these costs aren't seen as legitimate or necessary disaster-related expenses by the federal government, which just further highlights the unilateral, opaque nature of its funding and operation.
So it's a modern example of opaque operations, resistance to scrutiny, much like the old CIA days.
It certainly mirrors that pattern, yeah. Operating in the shadows, resisting oversight.
And it's not just physical spaces like detention centers or immigration policies, right? It's also happening in cutting-edge technology and maybe blurring the lines between private companies and national security. That suggests the architecture of control is adapting.
Absolutely. The adaptation is happening in real time, and it's crucial to track. Take SpaceX's Starshield project.
Yeah.
That's Elon Musk's military satellite initiative.
Okay, Starshield.
It is explicitly described in our sources as being shrouded in secrecy. Now, it's designed for national security, operates with a hefty $1.8 billion contract from the U.S. Department of Defense.
Big money.
Huge money. Yet, the exact details of how Starshield has been used are pretty vague. This isn't some minor program. It's a significant national security asset, vital for defense, yet its operations are largely opaque. Not just to the public, but seemingly even to elements of government oversight that would normally apply to such critical infrastructure.
Why is that significant?
Well, this project, along with the more public Starlink constellation, highlights a crucial and evolving dynamic: the blurring lines between corporate power and government control. Private companies are gaining immense influence, immense responsibility in areas that were traditionally solely military and national security functions.
Like SpaceX's satellites being used by the military.
Exactly. SpaceX's lasers, their advanced communication terminals, these are critical components for defense now. And that grants a private entity a seat at the table for military debates. It raises serious, complex questions about accountability, about transparency, even about national sovereignty, when services that could determine their fate in a conflict suddenly depend on a private company. A company that might have its own distinct corporate interests, right?
Definitely. And there are other risks too.
Oh, yeah. Beyond accountability, this massive deployment of satellite constellations raises significant environmental concerns, particularly orbital congestion, the risk of what's called the Kessler syndrome.
Kessler syndrome sounds familiar. Chain reaction of collisions.
Precisely. A catastrophic chain reaction where one impact creates debris, that debris causes more collisions, creating more debris until low Earth orbit becomes unusable, potentially for generations. It would make space travel incredibly dangerous, if not impossible.
That sounds like a nightmare scenario.
It is. And it's not just theoretical. Nations like Russia are actively developing anti-satellite weapons, both nuclear and non-nuclear, which poses a potential doomsday scenario for space access itself. So, the opacity around Starshield, combined with the immense power vested in a private entity for critical national security functions, it really mirrors the historical secrecy we saw with MKUltra. It reminds us that the temptation to operate beyond scrutiny is a persistent feature of power. It just shifts its form, its location. It shows a continued lack of checks and balances when the stakes are deemed high enough, regardless of whether it's a government agency or a private corporation pulling the levers.
Okay, so if state secrecy and resisting oversight form this enduring shadow from the past into the present, then the ability to actively shape public perception. That feels very much like the present and the future of control, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
This isn't just about hiding information anymore, but actively constructing our understanding of reality, making a story, a narrative, become, in essence, our collective truth. How do these powerful actors wield influence, not just through hidden ops, but by actively designing and spreading the very narratives that define what we even consider real?
Well, our sources introduce a really powerful, maybe almost unsettling idea here, one that fundamentally shifts how we think about control. It's the idea that reality is not a fixed, solid thing, but rather a story or a rumor that can be continuously written and rewritten.
Reality as a story that can be edited.
Exactly. It's a profound departure from just observing reality. It implies reality itself can be edited or even hacked. Now, if that's the case, then controlling information, especially the narratives we absorb, the stories we're told, allows for the deliberate shaping of a collective consensus-based perception. And that perception, for all practical purposes, becomes operational truth.
So it's not just propaganda anymore, it's like reality building.
Kinda, yeah. It's about actively constituting what we collectively understand as real.
Okay, there's a specific term for this, isn't there? Hyperstition.
Yes, hyperstition. It's a key concept here. Helps us grasp this mechanism. And it's not just a fancy academic term for a self-fulfilling prophecy, though there's overlap. It's defined more specifically as a fiction that makes itself real. Or, more evocatively, speaking something into existence.
A fiction that makes itself real. How?
It's a powerful narrative, a pervasive belief, maybe even a widespread delusion that, if it's articulated and spread widely enough, actually makes itself real through its influence on collective action and perception. Think of it like a self-fulfilling prophecy on steroids, maybe, or a mimetic virus, a concept that spreads not through rational argument, but by tapping into deeper, often subconscious emotional currents.
So it bypasses logic.
Often, yes. It bypasses rational defenses by gaining this kind of unshakable feeling of rightness. Once it takes hold in the collective consciousness, it becomes almost impossible to question. For instance, the classic example. If enough people genuinely believe the stock market is about to crash, their collective actions, panic selling, pulling investments, can actually cause the crash. The initial fiction becomes reality through belief and action.
That's a fascinating and, yeah, rather unsettling idea. Can you give us a more concrete example of this weaponized hyperstition in action, something that really illustrates its power to re-engineer reality?
Well, our sources present this Mysterian group called Zero Work as a prime, if somewhat abstract example.
Zero Work. Never heard of them.
They're depicted as using hyperstition deliberately to re-engineer reality through collective belief in tech. So Zero Work spreads this radical idea. All digital money could be redistributed. Debt could be wiped clean. Property could be algorithmically nationalized.
Whoa! That's radical!
Extremely. But here's the hyperstitional part. It isn't presented as just a political platform. It's an idea articulated and disseminated so powerfully that it starts to feel possible to a critical mass of people. Then, Zero Work claims to manifest these changes through actions like, well, algorithmically nationalizing property or wiping student debt, not necessarily through traditional political means, but by influencing the underlying digital infrastructure itself or making people believe they have,
So they spread the idea and then claim to make it happen.
essentially. And their symbol, this stark glitch zero, acts as a potent sigil.
A sigil, like in magic.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
A symbol charged with meaning through its proliferation. It becomes a hyperstitional seed engineered for maximum spread across digital networks. The symbol itself, maybe initially meaningless, gets charged with the collective belief it represents, and that charged symbol then influences behavior and thought.
Okay, that's weirdly powerful. And this extends to language itself.
Yes. The concept suggests that even the language we use daily, especially around technology, acts hyperstitionally. Terms like users, engagement, data, platforms.
Words we use all the time.
Exactly. They're presented not just as descriptive terms, but as incantations that magically summon the very systems they claim to describe.
How so?
By using these words, we actively participate in creating and reinforcing the economic and social reality of, say, surveillance capitalism. These words aren't neutral. They actively shape our perception and interaction with the digital world. They give form to abstract concepts, solidify their perceived reality, almost like a spell bringing something into existence. We are, in a sense, constantly casting these little spells through our everyday language.
That's a really different way to think about words like user. And before these external systems, these hyperstitions can influence us so deeply, it sounds like our internal mental landscape needs to be primed somehow. Like our minds are an operating system that can be programmed.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. Before any external systems, hyperstitions, political narratives, whatever, can profoundly influence us, our internal operating system, the mind, has to be programmed to accept the input, to make it feel natural, correct.
How does that work?
Maxwell Maltz's servo mechanism theory is really relevant here. Maltz was actually a plastic surgeon.
A plastic surgeon.
Yeah. He observed that his patients often reverted back to their previous self-image, even after physically successful operations. He theorized that the mind acts like a goal-seeking servo mechanism, constantly guiding us toward a deeply ingrained self-image, whether that image is of success or failure.
Like a thermostat for the self.
Kind of. It operates through this powerful feedback loop. Ideas we accept become deeply held beliefs. Those beliefs then dictate our actions. And our actions, in turn, confirm the original belief, reinforcing the self-image. We are, in essence, hypnotizing ourselves with our own assumptions about who we are, what we're capable of, what's possible. This creates a self-fulfilling internal reality that makes us highly susceptible to external narratives that align with those core assumptions.
Okay. And like any operating system, this internal one probably has glitches, vulnerabilities that can be exploited.
Exactly. Like any OS, it has exploitable glitches, psychological concepts like Carl Jung's inflation.
Inflation.
Yeah, where the ego gets overwhelmed by the unconscious, leading to grandiosity or maybe delusion. Or William Blake's concept of specters, which Blake described as the dark, delusional, self-destructive parts of the self that kind of separate from our true nature. These represent internal vulnerabilities.
So our own psychological weak spots.
Pretty much. These deep-seated psychological currents can be exploited by systems designed to hack an entire culture. By tapping into these deep archetypal currents, exploiting these emotional and psychological weaknesses, external narratives can acquire a kind of primal authority that bypasses logic and rational thought entirely.
Primal authority.
Yeah. It establishes that profound, unshakable sense of correctness we talked about with hyperstition. It makes the narrative incredibly resistant to challenge. It's basically sophisticated understanding of human psychology being leveraged for broad-scale influence, targeting the very bedrock of our individual and collective identity to shape reality. Hashtag 2.2 political narratives and cruelty as policy.
Okay, that's a truly chilling framework for understanding how minds, how whole cultures can be influenced. So let's bring this down to earth a bit. How do we see this narrative control, this active shaping of perception playing out in our current political landscape? Our sources highlight some really deliberate strategies that go way beyond just rhetoric, don't they? Where the impact seems to be the actual intent.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In the political sphere, unfortunately, we see very explicit and frankly disturbing examples of this kind of narrative control. Take the Trump administration's immigration policies, for instance. They are described in our sources as having cruelty, not just as some unfortunate side effect or outcome, but as the point, as the policy itself.
Cruelty as the point.
That's the framing.
Yeah.
Facilities like the one in the Florida Everglades we mentioned earlier, deliberately named alligator Alcatraz. And public discussions about them often include these vivid, almost theatrical mentions of real alligators and pythons lurking in the swamps nearby.
Right. Very evocative imagery.
Exactly. And the explicit aim of this deliberate messaging, this narrative construction, is stated pretty openly to scare the pants off of immigrants, to deter them from even attempting to cross the border. This isn't about operational efficiency or humane detention. It's a strategic deployment of psychological tactics. Fear, intimidation, even a touch of theatrical horror,
Yeah.
all used to achieve specific political objectives, regardless of the facility's actual function or its stated non-punitive purpose. It's about creating a hyperstitional narrative of absolute, unyielding, maybe even monstrous deterrence.
Wow. So it's a highly strategic, almost weaponized use of fear to shape behavior and public opinion. Like a hyperstition designed to make itself real through deterrence. And this tactic, shaping narratives to achieve political ends, it isn't just limited to immigration, is it?
No, absolutely not. It extends to other critical areas. For example, the manipulation of crime data to justify expanded federal power.
How so?
Well, we've seen significant allegations from a whistleblower suggesting that crime statistics in Washington, D.C. were deliberately manipulated or at least misrepresented.
To make crime seem worse than it was.
Exactly. To create a narrative that would justify a federal takeover of the city's policing functions. And this is particularly potent because the president holds unique and powerful authority over National Guard deployment in D.C.
Right, that's unique to D.C.
It is. It allows the president to temporarily federalize the Metropolitan Police Force and deploy federal law enforcement alongside the National Guard. And this gives federal forces the ability to intervene in a wide range of local issues, anything from immigration arrests to simply just police the streets, essentially overriding local authority whenever they choose.
So manipulate the data, create a crisis narrative, then step in with federal power.
That's the alleged strategy, and it's clearly framed by critics as an overt attempt to intimidate his political rivals within D.C. and maybe other jurisdictions seen as oppositional. They call it a federal power grab, policing and intruding in the rights of the cities and states. This narrative of escalating crime, even if based on shaky or manipulated data, serves to justify a more authoritarian federal presence.
And there's more to it.
Yeah, further solidifying this potential centralization of power, executive orders have been used to create these rapid response forces within the National Guard itself.
Rapid response forces.
Forces specifically trained for domestic confrontation, designed to be deployed quickly in urban environments, creating a visible, highly intimidating show of force that reinforces a particular narrative of control, order, and federal supremacy, often bypassing local civilian command structures. This isn't just about law enforcement statistics. It's about actively constructing a narrative of chaos that can only be solved by centralized, potentially unchecked federal power. Hashtag 2.3, the weaponization of law and citizenship.
Okay, that's a stark look at how narratives get constructed to justify expanding federal power. This raises an equally important, maybe even more fundamental question. How are existing legal frameworks and even the very concept of citizenship, something many of us assume is pretty secure, how are these being repurposed, maybe even weaponized, as tools of control? Sometimes with a chilling disregard for established legal processes and basic due process.
Yeah, this is a particularly insidious aspect of the architecture of control we're talking about, because it really undermines the very foundation of civic belonging, of safety within the law.
How is citizenship being weaponized?
Well, our sources indicate that the Justice Department, under recent administrations, has aggressively moved to strip naturalized citizens of their citizenship.
Naturalized citizens, people who weren't born here but became citizens legally.
Exactly. Through what are described as massive denaturalization campaigns, this is a significant shift in policy and practice.
How do they justify it?
These campaigns often hinge on scrutinizing minor paperwork errors or perceived inconsistencies from years, even decades, prior to their citizenship application. They leverage vague language in the law and exercise wider discretion in interpretation.
But wasn't denaturalization always really rare?
Historically, yes. It was used very rarely, generally reserved for extremely serious cases. Think former Nazis hiding their past, war criminals, individuals proven to have committed fundamental intentional fraud in their application. But now, critics argue, it poses a much broader risk, a risk to anyone who runs afoul of this administration, or potentially could be employed for perceived political purposes.
So it creates fear among millions of people.
A profound climate of fear, absolutely. Insecurity, vulnerability, Millions of naturalized citizens suddenly finding their fundamental status precarious, potentially hanging by a thread based on some minor mistake made years ago.
And it goes beyond naturalized citizens, doesn't it? There's been talk challenging birthright citizenship, too.
Yes, disturbingly so. President Trump explicitly spoke about the highly controversial idea of deporting U.S. citizens for crimes, including potentially individuals who were born in our country.
Deporting people born here, that goes against the 14th Amendment, surely.
It directly challenges the foundational principle of birthright citizenship guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, yes. More concretely, executive orders actually attempted to deny birthright citizenship to babies born in the U.S. if their parents are not citizens. This directly conflicts with the long-standing constitutional interpretation and risks rendering these children undocumented non-citizens or stateless entirely.
Stateless children born in the U.S.
Imagine. Such a policy would create permanent scars for an entire generation, denying them the fundamental rights and protections of citizenship from the moment they're born. Now, fortunately, federal courts have intervened. They've issued nationwide injunctions against these executive orders. They've certified class action lawsuits to protect these children.
Okay, so the courts pushed back.
They did push back, but the very attempt highlights the weaponization of citizenship itself, using it as a tool of political control, of intimidation, of defining who belongs and who doesn't, even against constitutional principles.
We've even seen cases mentioned where individuals were apparently wrongfully deported despite specific court orders preventing it. That's not just pushing legal boundaries. That sounds like directly challenging the rule of law itself.
Absolutely, and this is where the disregard for due process becomes particularly alarming, potentially crossing a line into illegality. The case of Kilmer Abrego Garcia, a Maryland man, is cited as central to this discussion.
What happened in?
Despite a specific court order against his deportation to El Salvador, he was, according to the reports, erroneously deported.
Erroneously, like by mistake.
Well, that's the question. Upon arrival in El Salvador, he was allegedly subjected to psychological and physical torture in a notorious prison known for its brutal conditions.
Jeez.
Crucially, his attorneys argue this was not a simple administrative error or accident. They contend there was a prior arrangement between the U.S. and El Salvador to deport individuals directly to that jail.
Wait, an arrangement to send people directly to a place known for torture.
That's the allegation, that he was deported intentionally to suffer that treatment. This suggests a deliberate circumvention of the U.S. justice system and a willingness to knowingly subject individuals to cruel treatment, directly violating a court order.
How did the government respond?
The government's subsequent response to his legal filings reportedly did not deny the abuses happened, but attempted to justify the deportation by labeling him a gang member, an accusation made without providing him due process or a fair hearing on that specific claim before deportation. This further erodes his fundamental rights and the principle of innocent until proven guilty.
This pattern of behavior, it leads to that chilling phrase you mentioned earlier, doesn't it? They can do that to anyone.
Exactly. That quote comes from Ezra Ravini, a Justice Department lawyer. He was fired, reportedly, for courageously telling a federal judge the truth about the erroneous deportation of 130 Venezuelans to El Salvador, again, despite a federal judge's explicit halt order. Ravini's warning, they can do that to anyone. It highlights a perceived, and indeed observed by some, expansion of governmental power that shows a frightening disregard for legal processes, for judicial orders, for individual rights. It speaks to a potential fundamental shift where the state apparatus feels it can act with impunity, even against its own citizens or legal residents, if it serves a particular agenda.
This level of action you hear about masked agents seizing people in unmarked vans, officials denying oversight access, seemingly disregarding court orders, it must have a severe and corrosive impact on public trust, right?
And just foster this pervasive sense of fear among ordinary people. It sounds like the system is actively undermining the very foundations of civic life. It absolutely does, and you could argue that's precisely part of the objective, or at least a predictable outcome, that isn't discouraged. The actions of masked men carrying weapons in unmarked vans conducting immigration raids, for example, cause immense confusion among the public and local police departments. It significantly erodes trust between citizens and law enforcement at all levels. This deliberate obfuscation of authority and identity, it's a classic tactic for instilling fear and uncertainty.
So people don't know who to trust, who has authority.
Right, and the consequence is that citizens are now commonly advised, you hear this advice, always carry proof of citizenship, like a passport card. Because, as the chilling saying goes, we now live in a country where if you don't have the ability to prove you're a citizen at all times in your pocket, they can do that to you.
That's a stark change in how people have to think about their daily lives.
It is. And it's not an exaggeration for some communities. It reflects a tangible degradation, according to critics, of the principles of honesty to the courts, and a chilling willingness to punish those, like Revenet, who contradict the administration's preferred narrative. It creates this new reality where individual liberty, especially for those perceived as outsiders or critics, or those without the right papers readily available, feels increasingly precarious, where the protection of law feels less like a guarantee and more like a privilege that can be revoked. This pervasive fear and uncertainty, born of unchecked power and obscured accountability, becomes yet another pillar in the architecture of control we've been discussing.
Wow. We've really explored the depths today, haven't we? I mean, from the ghost of MK Ultra and those chilling shadows of destroyed documents, the information void they left behind, to the strategic construction of reality through concepts like hyperstition, reality hacking, and then bringing it right down to the very real-world impacts of cruelty as policy on actual citizenship, on fundamental rights. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot.
But it paints this powerful and, I think, coherent picture of how influence and control actually operate, sometimes overtly, with brute force or policy changes, and other times in the quiet, almost invisible spaces of our collective perception, our assumptions.
What's consistently fascinating and yet indeed troubling when you look across these different examples is the persistent thread. It's the enduring nature of power itself, isn't it? And its inherent tendencies toward self-preservation, toward expansion.
Power corrupts.
Well, Jordan Peterson, in the context of analyzing that zero-work narrative we discussed, offers a pretty profound warning that resonates deeply with everything we've talked about today. He essentially says, all power will eventually and always corrupt.
Always. That's a strong statement.
It is. And he frames it not necessarily as a cynical take on specific individuals, but more as an observation on the nature of unchecked authority itself. He suggests that even revolutionary movements or attempts to fix perceived societal flaws like zero work claims to be doing can ironically end up embodying the very pride and the very mechanisms of control they initially sought to dismantle.
So the revolutionaries become the new establishment, potentially just as controlling.
That's the risk he highlights. And it suggests that a continuous vigilance is absolutely needed. Regardless of the actors involved, whether it's a government agency, a corporation, or even a supposedly liberating movement, a keen recognition that the underlying mechanisms of control often become deeply embedded in systems, regardless of who is nominally in charge at any given moment.
So for you, the listener, armed with these insights now, thinking about how information is controlled, how realities are shaped, how the very fabric of citizenship can be weaponized, what role do your beliefs play in this really intricate dance?
It's a critical question.
In a world where reality feels increasingly shaped by powerful narratives, by these carefully chosen fictions, by these invisible architectures of control, are your assumptions maybe reinforcing the old systems without you realizing it? Or are you, perhaps in your own quiet way, shaping a new protocol, a new understanding of what's truly possible, what's actually true?
Yeah.
What is the power of a quiet refusal, an act of defiance that maybe the system can't even see because it leaves no digital trace, no physical trace behind? Something to chew on, for sure, as you navigate the constructed and sometimes contested realities of our world.